if I were to take over and make one of the biggest repeats of the Roman Empire, I would set my eyes on specific land tracts, namely the Nile River and the ports on that side, and then the Black Sea. I would have to have that because that's the highway into Eurasia to deliver products or receive products. And then I would make sure that I had the entire Mediterranean set up as a trade zone and be able to tax every bit of the goods that they're going to need in Europe because they've shut down their own production.
You need the food first to have the civilization. And if you can control all that food from one area, you can decide who gets it and who doesn't. Then you can control a new grain growing area on the planet as areas in Canada and China and North America and Australia go offline and South Africa to bring up a new breadbasket in this same area. And I do welcome you wherever you are on this beautiful blue planet as we spin and orbit our happy star that is changing its magnetic field state, causing changes on our planet. Now, a lot of people knew coming in, stepping off this solar maximum, we'd experience more earthquakes. Santorini, the super famous Instagram spot, beautiful islands with all the white homes just packed in on the cliff there. They've evacuated the island. They've had something like 7,000 4.0 earthquakes in the last 3 weeks. Now, can you imagine living there? I was staying down here in southern Taiwan, and we had probably 8 earthquakes that were 4 or 5 or 5.5 over the last same amount of time. And even that amount is disturbing, where you're just like, okay, it just never comes back to normal again. Then, but to have that many, it would definitely wreck your human psyche to have that many going off at the same time. You would definitely want to leave just out of your body wouldn't function correctly. Your mind, the electrical connection with all that Paleozoic discharge charge hanging in the air, it would definitely affect your mental capacity. And hopefully it would put you more into like, we got to go and get out of here. People stealing eggs everywhere. Tether's building an open AI to run your Bitcoin transactions for you. What could go wrong there? There's just so much happening. It was one of those weeks where really 2 or 3 months of change has been packed into a week or 10 days. So this had happened during the COVID time, right? The overwhelm and the shock and awe of just so overwhelming in the news. Well, what's the story? What's really going on behind all of that? Because that front layer is really, it's like a fuzz, a scattering wave. For everybody's psyche, there's just 100 million stories to jump on top of. They're all just like grandiose, larger than life, Hollywood-esque times 10. And then they're layering on top of themselves. But I want to peel what's behind the layers back here of really what's going on. Because this shock and awe campaign, again, in the news cycle that we've seen, remember when it happened when the October 7th of last year, and the whole news cycle was dominated with just everything Middle East, everything invasion, everything boom, just everything completely taken over for those few weeks of shock and awe of what was happening with Israel and Gaza and Jordan and Iraq and Iran and missiles flying and the Russians with their Orsinic missiles, and just everything was happening. The same kind of completely layered, overwhelming shock and awe in the news. And then we're seeing it again right now. So what is being covered up is the question. That's the way we need to look at this tonight as we approach all these news stories here.
Never get left out in the cold. There is never a reason to ever let you or your family suffer. Instafire and Civilization Cycle are on a mission to make fire starting and off-grid living easy for everyone. You shouldn't have to be a mountain man to strike a flame and make a fire. Anytime, anywhere.
So Ransom, I know, I'd sent you a bunch of links from Japan setting new all-time record snow totals, 4 feet in 12 hours, just, record rains over in San Francisco. we're starting to see not only the climate fallout, but the economy fallout where gold leases, there's not enough gold on the planet anymore for everybody who wants it. So they're scrambling to deliver gold without collapsing the gold market. So we're at that point right now where society and civilization, as we understand it, is kind of at the very tailing end, being held by literally threads. And I think this is what they were trying. Did they put all this out to cover up the gold shortages? That's my question. So, Ransom, floor is yours, man.
Let's see if I can find my button. No, I've been watching like an eagle eye the moves that they've been making. And I'm convinced now I see a bigger portion of the plans for the future. I mean, it's just all fitting together nicely, kind of as predicted. We're going to have turmoil in the Western Hemisphere, but nation building. You know what's funny is that this whole group kind of that pushed to change politics now has been the group that's been claiming that, you know, we need to stop being entangled in foreign wars and no nation building. And then what I'm looking at is the exact opposite of that. We're setting up for massive empire building, which, you know, starts off as nation building. And the first step of any nation building is to flatten it. Demolition. You can take that however you want. But that is the first thing that you do. You flatten the older pre-existing infrastructure, and then you bulldoze it. Then you build new stuff. There you go. That's nation building, because you charge the country or whatever area it is to rebuild it. And therefore you can put your products and services and trade network in the place of what used to be there. So what I'm saying is just it's really kind of a pathetic repeat of every single empire that's ever existed in the Mediterranean. As far as there's two groups that want key points of land, and it has nothing to do with politics or you know, any of that kind of stuff. What it has to do with is nation building and empire building, because you have to set up the infrastructure first. And the only way that you can do that is to control every port of entry and piece of farmland that would be loading onto ships. So I'm pretty much seeing that. If I were to take over and make one of the biggest repeats of the Roman Empire, I would set my eyes on specific land tracts, namely the Nile River and the ports on that side, and then the Black Sea. I would have to have that because that's the highway into Eurasia to deliver products or receive products. And then I would make sure that I had the entire Mediterranean as set up as a trade zone where I could pick up things, maybe say in North Africa in a new grow zone, and just ship it right over the Mediterranean and be able to tax every bit of that the goods that they're going to need in Europe, because they've shut down their own production. So it's a good thing that there will be some new trade partners to the south that will be more than happy to ship stuff right there. And in order to do that, you got to make it safe for the new empire. And, well, if you've paid attention to any of these historical empires, you know, we've had, the Persians, the Phoenicians, the Babylonians. Well, they weren't really too much into the sea, but you had all of these other cultures that lived out there, the Minoans, etc. You could just go stretch back in time. But the key thing that all of these empires, from the Greek, the Roman, the Persians, the Phoenicians, the Egyptians, whoever had control any time period, they had to get that little area that connects the Black Sea with the Mediterranean, and also the Nile River and the ports that are near there. that go out into the Arabian Sea. So you have to have that. So every single one of those old empires had a map that you could just draw out, and logically that's where things are going. So that would include the North African countries all along the coast, and all of the bottom countries in Europe. So from Spain all the way over to Greece, Turkey, and the whole Levant. And you wouldn't be able to do that unless you could set up a permanent port to do business out of. I'm just saying that's what you'd have to do.
Now, the important thing to understand is the trade routes that moved through North Africa all the way over into the eastern side of the Mediterranean, like those were all controlled by the Ghana Kingdom and the Aksum Kingdom, and kingdoms you probably haven't heard of too much through history. They don't really teach that very much because these were such vast networks running through river systems and estuaries to facilitate their trade from West Africa to East Africa through some of the driest places on the planet. Now, we've always been told that, the last 6,000 years in the mid-Holocene going forward, that North Africa and the Sahel have just been, drier, like bone dry places. And that's always the way it's been. Well, it's really not been that way. If you go back 1,800 years, the trade between, and the gold trade and the salt trade and different spices and minerals as we understand today, were all taken by barges and what you consider reed boats. I mean, that whole connection from the Nile River all the way over into where some African mega lakes that still retained water that had canal systems brought into them, and then further afield down into the full river network across Africa. And there were still mega lakes that were connected by river systems through northern Africa. Like, this is returning now, these rainfalls, and that's why a lot of these cities and towns and villages that have followed the retreating water down as it was drying are now at the bottom of these lakes. And when the floods and the rains are returning like they are now, suddenly all these areas start to fill back up, and then you get all these towns inundated, everybody's flooded out. Well, those waters aren't going to recede. That's the big thing that people aren't understanding, is that, like, if you look at the historical pattern on this, we're going to start losing a lot of crops in the northerly latitudes, like 40 north and 40 south, and down to or above to the North Pole, which is most of Canadian crop growing zones, some of the North American. So where do you substitute this from? Because China's experiencing great losses in Heilongjiang, biggest floods ever recorded there, biggest snowstorms ever recorded. Korea's getting hit by just insane amounts of storms that are far out of the ordinary. Japan just got 12 feet of snow, or 12 feet of snow in 12 hours. I sent that link to you there. It was off the Watchers, which is a great site if anybody's taking a look at that. Let me pull up the article here for you. 4 feet of snow in 12 hours. That's the most they've ever had in a February storm ever. And that goes back to the 1600s. See, Japanese records go further back. They actually go back to about 800 AD. But what you consider official is about 1600 forward, because at that time, meticulous. So think about the Britain meticulousness, how England was very meticulous in their records. Well, Japan was just as meticulous. So were the Sumerians. I saw some old cuneiform tablets scrolling down, and it was a grain entry logbook, basically, but in cuneiform text, precise. They wanted to know where every grain of wheat went to, because remember, in the past, our value of money was determined by the grains of wheat or barley. Today, it's opposite. We just use the money to buy the grain. But in times past, when it was more difficult to produce food, the amount of grains equaled the silver weight. That's the difference. So the preciseness of even a few extra pounds of grain being lost in today's equivalent would be like extra rounds of silver bullion laying and just tossed off to the side. So as we trace back through history, understanding we're back at this cycle again, and this is why there's so much forced change happening in our world, we have to look at this very same area that is being nation built now, because the rains are returning, and they were once veritable gigantic breadbaskets. Ransom, I would encourage you, can you jump back to that map again of the Roman highway system in North Africa? Those areas Oh, that is the frankincense route. I could explain that one for a second here. So you see where it goes from Petra, from Gaza to Petra, all the way down to the Musa, and that's down where we consider Oman and Yemen area. So the Yemen port of Yemen is right there, Musa and Oselis. These areas were incredibly wet. This is where the Marib, M-A-R-I-B, the Marib Dam was located, and it was the largest water body dam system in the Middle East at that time, in now what is the driest place in the Middle East, heading out into the empty quarter. So they used to use this water system to irrigate the frankincense areas that covered hundreds of square miles, at least in that one region where it's all dark gray. They had the harvesting areas, the growing areas, the producing areas, all fed by irrigation from captured rainfall through the Oman and Yemen cliff systems. That's not there anymore. And then they used to run that all up and down the Red Sea there. And those areas became so prosperous and so wealthy. And if you were off left or off to the west in North Africa, the Aksum Kingdom and Sudan and Eritrea, I like to say that, they took over the gold coinage weight and measurement system from Romans after they collapsed around 500 AD. And they had the most precise gold coinage. But what's interesting is when you look at the back of their gold coins, it was wheat on the back of the gold coins with the king. It wasn't Nezerah, escapes me for a second. Had the wheat imprinted on the back of the coins. That's how important food was, even at that time. So you start taking a look at also the Roman road system that you had there. I'll send you that map. This follows exactly where our nation building is going on. Clinton, Hillary took out Libya. Well, they had the largest water project to grow and irrigate desert to grow crops. That, I think, was taken off the shelf for a little while until it's now going to be put back on the shelf. Like these proof of concepts, yeah, look how deep down. So if you look in the center, you see where there's that one strange area that jumps completely off and really far down into what was desert area. That wasn't desert area back then either. When the Romans had it, it was more of an estuary area where they were able to farm crops. So Gaddafi knew this same area and those two subsequent areas that pulled further south. They knew that those were more wet down there. There was more soil moisture in those areas. Those were grain growing areas in the Roman Empire time. So when you come down through Libya, yeah, and you go down in there and you get over to Morocco, getting a little more, and you got Tunisia up there, Egypt as well. Like they all increased their grain production incredibly, doubling their grain production over the last couple of years. Now, if it was one country that did it because they had new technology and new irrigation systems and they put $1 billion into water pumping stations, I get it. That's fine. But every single nation across North Africa increased their grain production from natural rainfall. So the cycle's coming back. Now, if you're going to nation build, now Ransom walked me through it, what are you going to need? You're going to want shorter transportation routes to deliver your most essential good, which would be food. Food. Because you can tap the Nubian sandstone aquifer areas too. That's just one, the Sus aquifer. There's like 100 aquifers under Africa to get your fresh water source. But you need that. You need the food first to have the civilization. And if you can control all that food from one area, you can decide who gets it and who doesn't. Then you can control a new grain growing area on the planet as areas in Canada and China and North America and Australia go offline in South Africa to bring up a new breadbasket in this same area. And, now we're seeing it in earnest. It's playing out, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, not only that, if you're a nation that's right there at the center of the ancient control of the Mediterranean. Nobody from the Asian countries, like Russia or anybody else, can come out of the Black Sea and do much because you control the outlet that allows you to go anywhere. So you can't stroll down to the Red Sea or none of that stuff, which means that you would cut off the trade for them. But like you said, you would have control of the trade there. And not only that, there would be less activity without risk of mutual assured destruction. So it's like a giant embassy that does business. Not unlike, ancient Aztec ports. And speaking of which, you would have to have the Panama Canal if you wanted to really hem up anything. If once you got those two locations, then all you need is a third location somewhere in the South China Sea or even a little east maybe Hawaii, Japan, and Taiwan, and you have basically hunkered down 2/3 of the world that will be in your control of trade. So it depends on how you look at it. What I see is the resurgence kind of the Roman Empire map, which is going to include most of the Middle East. We're making business deals with everyone, which seems to me, if they're so friendly to make business deals, then they're all on board with the redesignation of map lines, which we predicted for the last couple of years that this would be the outcome of all of the stuff there is redraw the map. And then you can, strategically place stuff where you need it. It'll be in the future, if you just think about that, with all of the shutting down and the weird socialist tendencies of European countries over the past decade and a half, we're going to get to a point where all of a sudden there's historically friendly flags showing up to sell goods to those people that don't have goods anymore, instead of them doing the same thing. But maybe they'll catch on, and then really that looks like a even stronger giant trade alliance that could be stability. Now, it could go the other way because they always have to have a little demolition, like I said, before you can have a new empire. You got to flatten the parking lot. You got to get your permits. You got to sign your contracts. And then you're open for business. And that's what's happening. The same thing is happening in the Western Hemisphere, though. New trade alliances are happening. I know a lot of people were against NAFTA, but that's essentially what we're about to have. I wouldn't even be surprised with the resurgence of a new idea that is essentially the North American corridor. And the reason for this is because we're open for business again. People said a lot, but then they changed their mind when it was time to renegotiate, which tells me that a lot of people are getting what they want behind the scenes. We're not even hearing about the stuff that we're conceding to get these deals, really. But it's starting to look like we might have the 80s over again in the U.S. But for everybody else, it's going to be a transitional period into something new. This reminds me a lot of the plans of the Trilateral Commission. I hate to mix things together, but when I hear certain things, it reminds me of other things. So basically, we're getting an East Asian trading bloc that's being set up. And that would, include the Pacific Ocean and all of the trade partners in there. And then another Mediterranean bloc, not a European bloc, but a Mediterranean bloc, because it includes North Africa. And there's a lot of people that want to do business there that we've traditionally had problems with, but everybody seems to be wanting to upgrade to a new lifestyle. Now, for some people, that would be just coming out of the 12th century into the industrial age. But for other people, they're going into an insane digitally controlled AI world. And what I mean by that is we are volunteering everything. I was watching this. It's the latest in the Star Wars franchise, and it was about a planet that mints the gold bars, and they were cut off from everybody else in the universe, and they were totally micromanaged by a supercomputer, and they had these little robots running around with cameras for heads, so there's always someone watching, and it was a happy utopia where everyone follows the rules, or the robots intercede and remove you from the population. Deportation, basically. You would get deported out of the system because you weren't playing the financial and rules game. And I think we're volunteering for that. Instead of a robot with a camera on their head, we just have lots of digital devices that make a 3D mapping system of everywhere we go, shop, eat, and all of this. And it's funny that the entire nation is just tripping on the price of eggs, as that's like a pivotal point in our civilization that egg costs are up. when all kinds of rebuilding of the reality is happening everywhere else. And everybody's been caught on to the last 10 years of fads and arguments and all of that. And it's easy to see now that's all a distraction. And in the background, everything is going as planned for the future. We're just not going to get out of it.
So what did they buy themselves? More time. The news distractions are here today, but the agenda moves forward another day by the distraction. All this shock and awe that's here at the moment. What got moved forward on the agenda behind that, into the globalist / technocracy, moving us into central bank digital currencies? Although Trump said we won't. That's cool, but have you seen Trump? True Social had filed for an exchange traded fund to trade Bitcoin. Okay, that's fine. BTC by itself, not really central bank digital currency. But the whole stablecoin offerings in America that are going to have regulation around it. Tether going to be part of the new treasury to issue stablecoin dollar offerings outside without inflating, but at the same time allowing you to borrow against your crypto holdings on that whole edge. They're setting up like a dual running ecosystem. And somehow in the future, not known yet, but this is going to dovetail into the treasury, where USD Tether is going to be allowed to mint like the treasury does for the crypto side of things on the outside. Now, is that a central bank digital currency? Not really in the perceived definition of it. But all these things are marching forward. The rest of the world's spinning forward with climate and this sort of World Health Organization. They're all still moving forward with the same lockstep outside, even though we in the United States have stopped. The rest of the world outside continues to move forward with that agenda that was, like you say, from the Trilateral Commission or the Club of Rome or these maps from the 10 kingdoms that was my most interesting thing, is these maps from the 10 kingdoms that were released in 1972 from the Club of Rome really start to put it into a lot of perspective of all this nation building happening. You look at that map, it's the exact same map. Like the things that were all different and separated before this year are going to be consolidated into 10 regions on the planet. Now, if you look at this map called the 10 Kingdoms map, this thing shows you already where the regions are going to be snapped together. So you take a look at that whole region from like Greater Israel all the way down through the Middle East, like that's all going to be snapped together in one region. Yeah, you see how that extends all the way through North Africa, all the way through the Middle East, all the way over, and then it stops pretty much at China once you come in through Pakistan and Afghanistan. Right up there, it looks like it around Kashmir. That whole area is going to be sandwiched into one autonomous overseen zone. And then if you look over where the black part is, that's connected with India and Myanmar and all the way down into like Laos and Cambodia and Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines. And what do you see there? I see Taiwan. And that's the whole thing is like Taiwan, oh, it's supposed to be invaded by China, it's supposed to be invaded by China. But you look at the map, no, it's not. That was all just a ploy for the weapons industry to sell more on the guise of it's about to be invaded, it's about to be invaded. Like we've been played left, right, and center. So this is truly the map we're moving to. So once you start to see that, and then you go, okay, well, all these peace agreements are coming in, they're here, they're there, they're here not, all these things are getting upset. And also you talked about the North American Union. That railroad map that extends all the way from Canada through the United States down into Mexico, and there are several railroads participating. CNS was the first one, and there's been a couple more railroads that have joined in on their routes from north to south, covering 3 different countries on the North American or the North American continent here. That whole north-south route is exactly what you just described, but it was first going to be rail routes that would open large cargo in and out. So that says something too. You're not moving like iPhones too much on a train. You're moving thousands of tons of grain on a train. You're moving thousands of tons of iron ore or other minerals on a train. That's what that's for. Bringing over cargo, super cheap to take it from China. That's how you're bringing your iPhones. You're not loading them on a break bark like open rail car to send them over up to Canada. That's not happening. This is for bulk carrier. Tungsten, yeah, another one that's gone off the rails here. I sent you that article earlier. I was talking to Bob Kudla last week. We did an interview, and he was saying he'd been telling me for the last 3 months, he's like, Dave, the market's going to crash. Tech get out. If you're in any tech, you got to move out of that. Not financial advice. Never really talked about it. Didn't know if it was going to come to fruition, but he kept saying the same thing. Tech's going to crash and we're going to move to commodities. He's like, man, we are going to commodities. You're going to watch every commodity run. And here we are. Tungsten is the first. Gold's the second. Not enough gold right now in the Bank of England's depositories because it's all locked. Here's another thing, ETFs, all right? So exchange traded funds. The underlying thing, like if you're going to start an exchange traded fund, you have to have at least some of it behind. So if I were going to have an ETF on phones, I need to have at least a certain amount of phones, like physical phones in a vault somewhere, and then I can issue some sort of contracts off of that, and then they can be listed on the stock market, and then you can buy in and sell on it because I have the underlying thing. I have the physical thing. Bitcoin ETF, they got to have a certain amount in cold storage that can be verified, easy to verify that, third party. You know where the transactions have gone, which wallet address they sit in, who claims that wallet address. That's super easy to trace that. I mean, that's like basic 101 understanding blockchain. You could do that analysis yourself within a week of understanding blockchain. If you knew nothing about it and you learned how transactions and hashes can be followed and how to use like Etherscan for Ethereum or whatever you're going to use, TronScan, you could follow. There's an enormous amount of different ones where you can follow out the transactions in each of those different coins and then their platforms. You know, where's it moving to? Even after a week of just knowing blockchain, you could verify how many Bitcoin are in an ETF address that's listed on Wall Street. That's simple. What's not simple is knowing how much gold's in a repository. And it seems that, at least from this last week of articles, they've run out of gold to deliver. And here's where we get in the rock and the hard place here. The ETFs need that gold in the depository or in the safe, if you like to call it that, the vault, whatever it is. There has to be a certain amount of tons of gold for them to operate and have their issuance listed on the stock market. If they take that gold away, they have to pull their listing from the stock market. And ETFs are not willing to do that. They've spent an enormous amount of millions of dollars of time and review and lawyers and then finally listing it and getting the brokers to list it. And it takes, you don't go from zero to full ETF on the stock market in like a week. That takes some serious planning, a lot of oversight, and a lot of money and time involved. But they have to have a certain number of, let's say 1 ton, I'll do simple math. You have to have a ton of it. And then you can say how many ounces that would be. And then you can offer those on your exchange traded fund on a stock market offering for a gold ETF in like New York or in Chicago. Okay. But you got to have that or else you can't. That has to be your base to even offer it. If you go below that, they pull you. You're offering it. No, you can't get listed on the market anymore. All right, so we're at that point now where everybody's pulled as much gold as possible out of the Bank of England. There's not really a spare ounce anywhere laying around. It's all locked up in ETFs. So now a lot of people want delivery. Gold's getting really hard to get. So people are like, I want my gold, I want my gold. And they're like, well, it's not here. We're going to have to lease it to give it to you. So then the Bank of England goes out on the open market and says, all right, I'll give you 20% more for the gold to borrow it short term, to give it to dude like me who wants my 400-ounce bar and give it to me. And then sometime in the future, I'll pay you with interest to give you your 400-ounce gold bar back. That's called leasing out the gold. So far, they're paying absurd premiums to lease this gold to get it back in for the Bank of England, to be able to give it to the people who want it for delivery. There's literally not enough gold on the planet. The system is truly about to collapse.